Hey, thank you for booking a call with me. I'm excited to get on a call and speak to you about getting you booked on the top ranked podcast in your space so that you can position yourself as a leading authority and attract all of your dream clients. Now, before our call, I urge you to watch till the end of this video so that way we can make the best use of our time together. If you do need to reschedule, please reschedule 24 hours before our call, as my calendar does fill up and I want to make space for people who are serious about getting booked on the top ranking podcasts. Also, please be sure to check out GeffenMediaGroup.com, our website, so that you can have more context on how we work and what we do. Thank you so much, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Hey, this video is a shout out for Daniel. This is Anik Singhal here from Learn. And I just want to tell you, if you're working or if you're thinking about working with Daniel on anything podcast related, he's awesome. See, here's what happened. I was getting ready to launch this book, and I wanted to do a podcast tour. I wanted to go around and be interviewed on podcasts so we could drive more awareness for the book. But the challenge was I didn't know anyone in the podcasting world. I didn't have at that time my own podcast. And you know, it's kind of a closed community, right? You got to know someone to get in, and how was I going to get these shows booked? So I reached out to Daniel, and this guy started lining up show after show after show after show after show. It was crazy. It was coming in so fast. I had to ask him to slow down. Until this day, those shows exist in the whole podcastosphere, and I'm still getting book sales. And you know what? This book was a huge success, a large part because of that. So I want to tell you right now that if you are in the world of podcasting or trying to get in and you want to do anything that has to do with podcasting, Daniel is the go-to guy, the most networked, the smartest, and one of the best people, and he delivers. He's a man of his word, which I respect the most about him. So, hey, if you want to do anything with the podcast or the podcast world, you got to get involved and you got to work with Daniel. Daniel, thank you so much. I hope everybody watches this, works with you. This is Anik Singhal reminding you when life pushes you, stand straight, smile, and push it the heck back. Talk to you soon.
So my name's Daniel Geffen. I'm a top 100 ranked podcast host, interviewed billionaires, world-class leaders. I'm also an international best-selling author of The Self-Help Addict, and I've helped hundreds of authors who went from invisible to well-known. They sold hundreds of thousands of books, and I've been doing this for the last 5 years. I've also partnered with the biggest book publisher in the world, HarperCollins. They reached out to me a few months ago and asked me to help them get their authors on the top-ranked podcasts. And I've also worked with some of the top leadership companies in the world. Most importantly, I'm a husband to the most incredible wife, and I'm a father to 5 little rascals who keep me very busy when I'm not doing this. So 6 years ago, I got a phone call that totally changed my life, as cheesy as that might sound. I was playing tennis, and this guy calls me up and says, "Daniel, I heard you have an interesting story. I'd love to have you on my podcast." And I'll never forget what I said. I said to him, "What the heck is a podcast?" Right? I had no idea what a podcast was back then. In fact, most people I knew didn't know what a podcast was. And he explained to me what a podcast is, and I got very excited because I had no speaking experience before then, except if you count, the times that I would get up on high school classroom tables and get detention for that. And I had no following at all. No social media following, no email list. In fact, if you typed my name into Google, I didn't exist. Anyway, there I was in my pajamas, staring at a blank wall with a microphone in my face, and I just started talking and sharing my story. I fell in love with the microphone, and at the end of it, the host said, "Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show." And I said, "Well, thank you so much for having me, but I do have one question. Besides for you and your mother, who else was listening to this, right?" And he said, "Well, Daniel, there were over 1,000 people listening." And I fell off my chair. I said, "What? 1,000 people? Where are all these people?" And he's like, "Well, they're all over the world." And he starts listing all these countries. And my brain just went wild because I thought, well, some of the top speakers in the world travel halfway across the planet to get on stage. And if they've got 1,000 people in the audience, that's a packed crowd. And then there's me, little Daniel, who had no audience, no speaking experience, sitting there in my pajamas in my basement, staring at a blank wall, and there I was talking to over 1,000 people all over the world. And that's when I realized the power of podcasting. And I decided I've got to get into podcasting. So 2 weeks later, I started my own podcast called Can I Pick Your Brain? And the goal was to pick the brains of the most successful business leaders in our generation. The problem was there were two things that I didn't have. One, I didn't have any contacts or relationships. I didn't know any successful business leaders to interview. Number two is, how do I get people to listen to this podcast? I didn't have any audience or any social media following that I could promote to. And that's when I had the aha moment where I thought, why don't I leverage other people's audiences? Instead of trying to do this all from scratch and trying to figure this out myself, I'll just go and be a guest on other people's podcasts and then talk about my story and then share my podcast with them, and hopefully they'll come and listen. So to cut a long story short, within a very short period of time of getting on other people's podcasts, my own podcast became a top 100 ranked show on iTunes. I ended up interviewing 4 billionaires. I interviewed the smartest man alive, the leading hostage negotiator for the FBI, the US memory champion, and a whole host of incredible guests that you've probably heard of. Then I wrote a book called The Self-Help Addict, which became a #1 international bestseller on Amazon, and that all happened with me just getting booked as a guest on other people's podcasts. The problem today is that the attention span of the average person is about 8 seconds. That's 1 second less than a goldfish, right? In order to be able to sell anything, you need to have somebody's attention for long enough, right? And if you can imagine posting on social media today, who's reading your post, right? You've got Susie sitting on the toilet till her thighs go numb. She's not buying your book. In the 3 seconds that she has, that she's scrolling through that feed, and your post about whatever it is that you're posting about, not going to get her to buy anything. Right? Social media is very noisy. Everybody's posting on social media. It's very, very hard to get attention in that space. The other problem is, even if you try to advertise, over 500 million people have ad blockers installed on their devices. The reason why is because nobody wants to be interrupted with ads. Ads are annoying. People hate being interrupted. So the question is, where is the attention today? And the answer is, it's on podcasts, right? Over 85% of people listen to the whole episode of a podcast from beginning to end, and the average podcast episode is 45 minutes long. Now, that's a gold mine, because if you can get someone's attention for 45 minutes and you can't sell what you are offering, you need to go do something else. Right? There's over 2.5 million podcasts, and that number keeps growing. And there's over 140 million Americans listening to podcasts today. And what's great about the podcast space is that people who listen to podcasts are people who invest in their growth, and they're in a buying state, which means they're in a proactive mind state, right? As opposed to people who are on social media who are just passively scrolling through their feeds, and they're just sort of numbing their minds. And the people who listen to podcasts are the people who buy books. They're the ones that hire coaches. They're the ones that buy courses. Those are the people who invest in themselves. This is why you'll see also that New York Times bestselling authors do podcast tours for their book releases, because that's where the attention is today. When you're a guest on a podcast, you could speak to thousands of ideal prospects at once instead of one at a time. Now, I get on sales calls where people feel like they know me already because they heard me on a podcast 3 years ago, right? So I could have been on a podcast 3 years ago, and today someone discovers me, they hear my story, and they hear, how I can help people, and the next thing I know, I'm on a sales call with them, and they're just like, well, Daniel, I feel like I already know you. In fact, I had a sales call about 3 weeks ago. This guy gets on a call with me. He was actually at the dentist. And within 5 minutes, he says, Daniel, just send me the invoice. I feel like I already know you. I trust you. I want to work with you. Let's do it. That was a 5-minute sales call. And we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars, right? So being on a podcast allows you to shorten your sales cycle, right? By getting people to know and trust you already before you get on the call. What's also great about being on podcasts is that you're creating evergreen content so that your dream clients will discover you for years to come without you doing anything. When you're invited as a guest on a podcast, you're getting instant credibility because people who are listening to that podcast, they trust the host. They look up to them as a mentor. And when they're having you on their show as a guest, they look at you like you've got to be somebody legit. Ellie Nash hired my booking agency, And when he hired us, he was completely invisible online. Nobody heard of him. He had an incredibly important message to share, but he didn't know how to share it with the people that needed to hear it. He started with absolutely no audience or following, and after doing a podcast guest tour, his TED Talk got over 3.5 million views. Today, he's built a recognizable movement that is helping millions of people all over the world. You know, podcast guesting has helped me become a best-selling author. It helped me become a leading expert in my space and attracting my dream clients while living a fulfilled life. And here's the thing. One great podcast tour can be the opening to a successful speaking career and thriving business. How much more time would you have if one podcast tour was all you needed? Look, you could try doing this yourself. However, the thing is that getting on small podcasts is easy. It's getting on the big ones that's really hard. And the big ones are the ones that really count. Because 95% of podcasts are really, really small. Only the top 5% really make a difference. And what you really want as a podcast guest is you want to get on podcasts that have quality and are relevant to your audience. You want to be speaking on the biggest podcasts in your space. And here's the problem. Top-ranked hosts get pitched hundreds of times a week. You know, there's only so many slots that a top-rated host can fill. And if you're sending them a pitch, you know, the chances of you getting on their show is going to be very, very slim. Because unless you know them personally, or unless you know how to position yourself really, really well, most likely they're not going to accept you on their show. It takes years to build the right relationships. And being able to position yourself in the best way requires someone who understands what the hosts are looking for. So here's my question to you. How much would it be worth to you if you had backdoor access to all the top podcasts that your dream clients are already listening to?
Hey friends, Dustin Matthews here, host of the Get Well Fit Show, and I am excited to tell you about Daniel Geffen. And the reason why is prior to this venture and starting actually my own podcast, I was on a bunch of podcasts thanks to Daniel. You see, I had a book coming out last year and I was a little late to the podcast game, so I identified, hey, I need to get out there, I need to get my message out, and I need to move a lot of these books. And so I enrolled Daniel Geffen to help me get on 40 podcasts in a very short, I'm talking 45 to 60 day timeline, so that I could get the podcast community informed about my book. And as a result of that, I was able to hit Amazon bestseller list, I was able to generate leads for my business, and life was a lot better because I was able to get out there and get on shows. So if you're looking to get on shows and you don't want to like reach out to 140 people to get, you know, the 30 or 40 appearances that you desire, or heck, maybe you want to do 1 or 2 a month, then you should definitely get someone on your team, and I highly recommend Daniel Geffen to do so.
Hey, John Ruhlin here, author of Giftology. Just wanted to share a couple quick things about my love for podcasting and being on podcasts specifically. 2 things have happened for me over the last couple years since Giftology came out. One is podcasts have been our number one way of driving not only interest in Giftology, the book, but also selling the book. We've been fortunate to be on Fox News nationally and other things like that, and hands down podcasts have actually sold more than even being in national media, which is pretty crazy, but we do track when those things go live, and podcasting by far. And secondly, we've been raising our keynote fee up pretty significantly over the last couple years, from $5,000 to now $25,000. And we've actually booked along the way some keynote fees with some pretty large companies, one of them being about $1 billion company, and that came directly from somebody hearing us on a podcast, liking it, buying the book, and then reaching out to book us for their sales meeting. So huge fan of podcasts. I think it's one of the most effective and low cost ways to build not only credibility, but to get a brand out there. And super grateful. Thanks.
I believe that the number one opportunity for the majority of this room is a very strong strategy around podcasting and audio content.